Anyway, welcome. It is a very exciting time for us. We are in hybrid. It used to be that would have been a bad thing. Now it's actually a success. And we were the last committee to actually function. Senator Hoffman, if you recall, we did the $30 million thing, which finally became true after only 6 months. And today we're back. We're not the first committee to be hybrid, but we do have the first human testifiers in front of us, and amazing testifiers at that. Today we're going to learn about spinal cord injuries. Senator Housley has that bill, and then we'll spend some time talking about federal grants. So, Senator Housley, welcome to the committee, and welcome to Zoom hybrid. So you're evidence of the hybrid nature of our committee. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for having me. I would be down there. You're just like right a floor below, but I was afraid that another computer with more audio was going to mess things up. So I'll come down after I present to do the rest of the committee. But thank you, Mr. Chair and members. There are 1.3 million Americans that are living with paralysis from spinal cord injury, and they were all told that their paralysis is permanent, but medical science is changing that. And so much of the medical science and research is being done right here in Minnesota. In 2015, the legislature passed funding grants of $3 million a year to go towards the spinal cord injury and traumatic brain injury research. Our state is now a world leader in this area, and we've made a difference in many people's lives, and we need to continue this research to get the treatments to so many more who are living with paralysis. And much of this research is just being done down the road at Mayo Clinic. In 2018, they were able to implant a spinal cord stimulation device into a 29-year-old man who was paralyzed from the chest down in a snowmobile accident. With the device activated, he was able to walk the length of a football field with the aid of a walker. And more have since had the device implanted with similarly exciting results. The research is going to continue if there's funding, and this was just the first step. In this bill that we are looking at today, there's money for the spinal cord injury and traumatic brain injury grant program. The money for the research that was done at the Mayo Clinic was actually through that grant program with collaborations with other foundations, including the Jack Jablonski Believe in Miracles Foundation. We all remember Jack Jablonski's accident playing in a Minnesota State high school hockey game that left him paralyzed from the chest down, much like Rob and Jake that are going to be testifying coming up here. But Jack and many of you, especially you, Senator Abler and Senator Hoffman, have been huge advocates for the research, along with Jack and Matt that's going to be coming up to speak too. So the reason for this bill is last week when the governor came out with his budget proposal, it was extremely upsetting that he cut all funding to this spinal cord injury and traumatic brain injury research grant program. We had allotted in 2015 $3 million per year. And like I said, this program has been extremely successful. And a lot of us don't understand why it was cut, didn't make any sense, and why he chose these folks here to cut from was beyond me. The governor gave us the reason that he said that the Office of Higher Education doesn't have the relevant expertise and traditionally has not served as an evaluator of medical research proposals. And then he went on to say why the research is important, it appears to be misaligned with the agency's mission. So again, he cut all of their funding, $3 million a year. So what this bill does, it moves the funding grants over to the Department of Human Services, which can serve as the evaluator of medical research proposals. And we've also increased that funding from $3 million to $5 million per year. We have a letter in your packet from the Jack Jablonski Foundation. And what Jack says in the letter is challenging times require tough budgeting decisions, but there is a big difference between cutting the budget and cutting paralysis recovery entirely from the state's priorities. And this is a state priority. It is so, so important to over 1 million folks who are living with some sort of paralysis. And for Minnesota to remain a world leader in this field of research, we want the state to continue funding this program. So that is what we have in front of us, Mr. Chair and members, and I'm so hoping that this is something that is a priority for our state, and hopefully we can come out with a Senate position that says it is. So thank you. Well,
thank you, Senator Housley, and it is absolutely a priority of the Senate. And I just can't stop being so excited. Your voice rang across room 1200 as clear as could be, and so fitting that the first words of any testimony are about things as a topic as critical as this. And so I also just want to put a plug in. Thank you to the Sergeant's Office and to the Secretary of Senate and a whole bunch of staff. We've had nobody here, and suddenly we're awash with people making sure everything in the pages, and it takes quite an army to put this together behind the scenes, and they're all back. And so we even have 3 public members, and actually more, there's some maybe a half a dozen of people in the public that are here today, so we're on the way back toward engaging the public, which I think is really so important. Mr. Wedlick, welcome to the committee, and welcome to be the first public testifier in the return of the public to the Senate since March. So welcome, and tell us what you have to say. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair Adler, and thank you, members of the committee, for having this be an important issue that we're the first hybrid hearing for this too, and it shows how important this program means to you guys and our community means. So thank you. My name is Rob Woodlick. I'm somebody that lives with a spinal cord injury, and I also part of Get Up, Stand Up to Cure Paralysis. I'm going to go back to when I broke my neck in 2011, and I woke up. I was on a 25-day river trip on the Grand Canyon, and woke up to a great sunrise and ready to go raft all day long. And around lunchtime, I dove into the river to get some trash that blew off one of our boats, and broke my neck, and that changed my life forever. Not having the ability to move, feed myself, having to rely on other people for help for everything I do. It's a huge detrimental impact on my life and my family's life too, who takes care of me. So, my big thing is, I want to get better. I want to be able to feed myself and take care of other people physically, and get back to some of the things I love doing outside. But any increment to that, as far as, moving my hand a little bit more or feeding myself and so on, is a huge game changer too. This program, when we passed it in 2015, it's been a huge success in the Office of Higher Education. There's 14 committee members of researchers, clinicians, healthcare representatives, and community members. There's at least 6 community members on the council, and that makes a huge community impact statement with what's awarded, and it really brings a great perspective. We funded 55 programs in the last 5 years, and some of that we're seeing people walking. It's bringing hope. We're seeing body improvements in people, things that were not happening and would not be possible if it weren't for this program. There's researchers moving to the state because of this program. It's created a whole ecosystem for the research community and for students that are looking to learn, and for people that are receiving treatments. When the governor's budget proposal came out, we were extremely disappointed. And we understand, there's priorities and potentially a rough budget year and COVID and everything. But eliminating this program is completely the wrong call in our opinion. And there's a large community of people that want this program to keep going and be strong. It really affects our lives. It affects the lives of students. And for me personally, this is, it's really like, it hurts. We don't want to see this getting taken away. I was talking last week with a friend of mine in California who decades ago started one of these programs, and it was eliminated in the 2008 recession in California, and it still hasn't come back. And he fights every year to get it and they've seen a huge brain drain in talent. I think some of them might have moved to Minnesota, hopefully. But also, I mean, it really impacted the people with spinal cord injuries there that were hoping to get research, cutting edge research in this field. We need this program because spinal cord injury research really does not get a lot of attention as far as research funding, like diabetes and cancer and some of the bigger issues out there. So there's per capita a lot less spending in this population in brain injuries. And there's a growing demand for this program. We turn away really good programs, but overall, I just want my body back. I want my freedom, I want my independence. And we hope that this is a misunderstanding, or we need to educate more people about this more. And thank you, everyone, for hearing this. And this is a great session.
Thank you, Mr. Woodlick, and Senator Utke has a question.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Woodlick. You mentioned something that I just get a little clarification or a little more information before you back up from the microphone there, but there was 55 programs that were funded or now lost in the last, I think you said 3 to 5 years or whatever that was.
Yeah.
Can you just give us a little bit about what those programs are?
Yeah, so.
Mr. Woodlick.
Okay. So I think the highest impact, in my opinion, is the eSTAN project. It's at the University of Minnesota in Hennepin Healthcare. And they're taking Boston Scientific and St. Jude, Abbott Medical neurostimulators and putting them in people with spinal cord injuries. They were gaining voluntary movement, autonomic function, bowel, bladder, sexual. Kathy Allen, she's a strong advocate. Hopefully we hear from her later on in the session. She has stronger core stability, so she's able to drive a car around corners now or ride public transportation. She wasn't able to do that before. So it's little things that are leading on to bigger things and huge impacts. Everyone that I've talked to that's done that program has said, this has really changed their lives. I think one of my favorite projects that's funded through this is this at the University of Minnesota. It's induced pluripotent stem cell research, and they're taking your own skin cells and turning them into neural stem cells, putting them in a 3D printed neural graph that they can then put into your spinal cord. They take an MRI of your spinal cord and print it out to your exact spinal cord and have these nerve growth factors that, it's really amazing work. And yeah.
Senator Utke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, but just thank you very much. It's amazing some of the work that is being done, and thank you for giving us this information. I sure appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Woodlick. So if you want to, we're going to change gears a little bit here. So while they're changing, I want to point out that Senator Utke had the first question of the first testifier of the first hybrid hearing with a testifier in the Senate.
We're going into multiple pages of this new book.
There'll be participation trophies for all for this. And while they're switching up here, you're already there.
I think it'll be good.
That was pretty quick. Mr. Anderson, I'm so happy you can be here with us today. Welcome to the committee.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. I'd like to start out by just telling you a little bit about my story and myself. My name's Jake Anderson. I'm 26 years old. I'm from Chanhassen. I live now where I grew up with my parents and 2 younger siblings. And as a child, I was always a curious and some would say overactive kid. I was just constantly moving. If I wasn't in the living room, running back and forth, wearing holes in the carpet, throwing a football to myself. I was probably in the backyard playing pond hockey with my younger siblings on the rink that my dad made for us out of 2x4s and plywood. And my love of learning and sports, they continued through high school, where I was the top graduate of my class from Chanhassen in 2012. And I went on to study mechanical engineering at the University of Wisconsin. And after 2 successful years there, on a day full of fun and sunshine and swimming with friends, I made a mistake that would change the course of the rest of my life, and dove in headfirst into Lake Mendota, which borders the campus there in Madison, and hit my head on the bottom of the lake and suffered a cervical spinal cord injury. At the time of my injury, it was completely devastating. Devastating to my future, to my aspirations, to my relationships, and most of all, my family. But I sit before you today, 6.5 years later, in the same broken body, but I'm healthy, I'm happy, and I've achieved many of the goals that I had before I was injured. Above all of this, I'm hopeful, and one of the main reasons that I'm hopeful is the program under consideration today. Now, this is not a hope that's based in fiction or falsehoods, but a hope based in science and results. Now, as Rob mentioned, walking is certainly important. It's often seen as, you know, the ultimatum of the situation. Either you're walking or you're not, for people with spinal cord injuries. But the reality is that there's so much more in between, and there are so many small improvements to be gained for quality of life and fulfillment of purpose. Some of those things include bowel, bladder, sexual function, autonomic functions, things that your body is just normally, you know, supposed to be able to do that just don't function the same as they used to. And these are things, along with walking, that we've seen improvements with through these curative interventions. And that's really why we're here today, and having something like this been established in 2015, come so far in only 6 years, and then to see it left out of the budget is just really disappointing. The impact of the program has been felt by the spinal cord injury community, the traumatic brain injury community, the research infrastructure in Minnesota, and the greater population of Minnesota in becoming a leader in this space. So I want to thank you all for having us today, and appreciate you hearing what I had to say.
I'm so happy you're here. Questions from members? Oh, it's Senator Nelson. You get the second hybrid question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just thank you for coming today and for sharing your story and for sharing your hope. And we must never let the state of Minnesota stand in the way of medical innovation that is changing people's lives. We've seen it. Deep brain stimulation is giving people back their lives, their bodies, and the control of those bodies. And it is just shocking to think that one would even consider going back and stopping this world-breaking, life-changing, these medical innovations. And I thank Senator Housley for bringing this bill forward, for Chair Abler for granting a speedy hearing to this bill, and to you, who have come to this legislature many times before and who are here today to stand up for medical innovation that works. Minnesota government should not stand in the way of that. So thank you very much for being here today.
And thank you as well.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. So that was awesome. And I'm so happy you're here. We have one more testifier. And sir, you can come sit at the table there. How fitting. What a start this is. So Mr. Roderick, welcome to the committee. And so for the people watching at home, we each have to use our own computer cameras, and then we use the room audio. And it's so exciting to have the room audio be on and see people here. And Mr. Woodlick, Mr. Anderson, Mr. Roderick, welcome to the committee, and it's so good to have you here, sir.
Thanks, Senator Avery. Thank you.
So if you mute your computer. You shouldn't have brought the reverberator with you. Woo.
Got it. Okay. Apologies for that. Thank you.
Actually,
thank
welcome to the first testifier with massive feedback. That's another award.
1,000 hertz feedback.
Can you do a Zoom call without, can you hear me now?
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Thank you for the reception also thus far. I just wanted to add a couple of comments to what Rob and Jake gave to you. The first one is it's very important that you all understand that this was brought to the legislature by the community. This was the brainchild of the spinal cord injury and traumatic brain injury community. We brought it forward. It wasn't brought forward by the University of Minnesota, the Mayo Clinic, or HCMC, or anybody else. We've partnered with them, but that's very important because in the governor's description of why this was defunded, there was a comment about lacking the expertise to assess research proposals like this, which I don't believe is true in higher education or any other sort of body in the state of Minnesota. But most importantly, the key element that we brought forward, which we believe is why this program is working, is that the community is represented on the advisory board with the expertise of living with the injury. I have a son who has a spinal cord injury, so I'm father to a son with an injury very much similar to Rob and Jake's. I have had the opportunity to sit on that advisory board because I bring the expertise of living in close proximity to the injury in collaboration with those who research the injury and those who treat the injury. This is a key element as to why this program has worked and why specifically it has accelerated particular discoveries into human relevance. There's an unmet human need in this research, and so we wanted to drive the research to human beings. And so the things that were described to you are happening for that very reason. That's why this program is so critical and fundamental, and that should not be taken away from our community, because we're sort of the engine of its success. We did a lot of homework. There are other states that had funding mechanisms like this. We created one very specifically to work and to do what we intended it to do, and it is doing that. So things like Rob described and Jake described, people in the HCM study, the ESTAN trial. There's a woman almost 7 years post-injury complete paralysis, had her first orgasm since being injured. So that sexual function returned and has continued. That's enormous for people with paralysis who cannot feel or have particular functions, bowel, bladder, sexual function, beyond the ability to stand, walk. This is happening because people who know the injury are advising researchers and clinicians and policymakers on how we should do this. So that's one thing I wanted you to make sure that was clear and understood, that this is coming from us. And then the second thing is, and I was talking to Senator Hoffman about this earlier, I was on a call yesterday with the Spinal Cord Injury Organization and Foundation in Vancouver, British Columbia. And one of the folks on the call said to me, well, should I call the governor or legislators? And, I don't understand your politics up here in Canada. And I said, absolutely. And he said, well, because we know all about your program in Vancouver, and we support it, and we've seen the implications of it. There's a researcher in British Columbia who collaborated on that very project that I just described at HCMC. There have been collaborations from around the world coming out of Minnesota. And so I've had calls, I've been emails from people all over the world asking, should I call? I'm not sure, I'm not a constituent of you all in Minnesota, and I said, absolutely call. They need to know that we've had an impact all over the place. And so I think that's also something that should be understood. We in the advocacy community are excited by what we've accomplished here in Minnesota, so much so. The other thing I told John Hoffman is that we use this Minnesota bill to go ahead and pass bills in Washington State, Ohio, Pennsylvania. We've introduced a bill in Wisconsin, and we soon will be introducing bills in Texas and Colorado. And you know what we send them? We send them the Minnesota bill, the statute. This is sort of our version of a gold standard. And we have been successful, and we are now funding and accelerating research in places all over the country because of what we started here. So I just wanted you to understand a little bit of context around what led to this and then what it is doing beyond even the boundaries of Minnesota. So thank you for your time. Very much appreciate it. Senator Abler, appreciate the invitation.
Mr. Roderick, thank you very much. Senator Hoffman, did you want to say something?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Roderick. It brings back some really interesting memories of when we all first met back in the day in the Capitol, and that first bill was actually, I was the chief author of that, and was to take it away from fighting all the time for getting less money from human services budget, right? And then just to say, this is really research. This needs to be in higher ed, which is what we did. And then at the time, it was Senator Bonoff who just said, this totally makes sense. And then I'll never forget just the momentum that first year, the first study from the Mayo, HCMC, the University of Minnesota, you were getting those positive outcomes, those positive results that were coming back. So much that then to get more money, it was Dr. Jensen who then brought a bill that, over here. And again, the House overwhelmingly supported that, saying, let's invest in this. This is what Minnesotans do, invest in those positive outcomes. And once again, the fundamental engine of success we are seeing right here. And of all places, the University of Minnesota, the story I'm glad you shared is the University of Vancouver. They're like, no, we know who you are. We absolutely know who Minnesota is. They're the ones who set the template on this. That's huge. This is a small little investment. So I just really believe that what you're saying absolutely makes sense. Senator Abel, I believe this should stay in higher ed, although I do know you have the language on DHS on this thing, but it's just a absolute travesty to see this go away, because Minnesota, once again, has put the spotlight on research from the University of Minnesota that makes us #1.
Can I add one quick thing?
Mr. Roderick, yeah.
Thank you, Senator Abler. One, just to add on to that, Senator Hoffman, the little sort of small nuance. We have facilitated, I think it's 3 meetings now, between the Minnesota Office of Higher Education, the Ohio Office of Higher Education, and the Pennsylvania Department of Health to share knowledge, best practice on this program, because Ohio and Pennsylvania followed. But in each call, the end of the conversation from us was, we'd like to explore how to amplify this. Are there opportunities to collaborate across states and do something bigger than one state alone? And there's been an embrace of that in each of those states and within our own state as well, to collaborate and amplify the investment that each of the states have put in, because of the opportunity, obviously, to collaborate across institutions, across disciplines and expertise. So there's just great opportunity for it to grow. Thank you.
Senator Fateh, then Senator Housley. Senator Fateh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Senator Housley, for putting this forward, as well as the testifiers for coming out and speaking and sharing their stories. I support this 100%. I think it's a no-brainer. But I also want to point out that we don't have to cut anything at the same time. We can expand this program and other programs similar to it if we agree to raising revenue from those who have been, by pure luck, able to prosper during COVID-19. But to specifically, Mr. Roderick, I really appreciate what you've said. The gains and the progress that has been made because of this research. I'm really hopeful for what comes ahead with this. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Senator Housley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if I could play a brief video that shows exactly what is being done down at the, with this research money. It's a minute and 44 seconds. So I don't know if Brittany can share the screen, or let's see if I can
Can you
share
hold up
my-
your phone or something?
Mr. Chair, Senator Housley, I think you can share your screen and share a web browser. I don't think I'll be able to because I'm in 1200.
Okay, so you know what? I should have practiced
Is it on your phone?
No. It's share screen. Here we go, full screen mode. Okay, it's just not sharing. All right.
Well, why don't you work at that a little bit, and Senator Nelson has a question. So I think we are so far over time, it doesn't matter anymore, Senator Housley. This is, you know, as a chair, you kind of plan time, and like, I don't care if it takes the whole hour to talk about this, so. Senator Nelson, so work on it. Maybe you can phone a friend or phone my kid or something. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just actually a comment, not necessarily a question, but in line with Senator Hoffman's comments, remembering how this bill started and progressed, and I was part of that higher ed committee, and did feel at that time that that is where we could get those research dollars. And I'm so thankful. And it is a public-private a partnership in this. Certainly the University of Minnesota, but Mayo Clinic has done an amazing job. Dr. Kendall Lee with deep brain stimulation has been a leader in this, as has the University of Minnesota and others, as you have brought forth as well. And it is exciting to see these type of things that are working, innovations that are changing lives in miraculous ways, things we could not even imagine a decade ago. That is miraculous. And it is essential that we continue this momentum moving forward. And I did notice Senator Housley's bill, which I'm so glad that she has brought this forward. But I did notice that this bill actually changes that funding mechanism, that funding place to the Department of Human Services. And I realize that we'll have some great discussions about that. I want to be very clear. My point and my position will be, where is this type of funding the most secure? And I don't know at this point if it would be higher ed, where those research dollars are, or if it would be in the Department of Human Services. But we'll flesh that out. But I do have a question, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure whom to address it to or whom could answer. But I do believe that there are also federal dollars that should be coming to support deep brain stimulation. I believe there are, and I'm wondering if somebody can speak to that.
Mr. Roderick.
I can speak to it, and yes, one of the things that we had projected from this investment at the state level is that there would be other monies to follow. And we have seen that already. We have seen grants come in from NIH or NIBIB, you know, various federal funding programs, but also from private foundations. And also, I think, as Rob mentioned, from Abbott. The study at HCMC there was an in-kind commitment of, I believe, 100 devices at $40-some thousand a pop over time. So there has been, you know, not technical matching dollars, but support from all of those agencies. And all of the states that have done this some of this program here in Minnesota was modeled after some other states, mostly on the East Coast. But every single one of them over time saw an investment from federal dollars coming into research into a particular area because the wheels had been greased and the momentum picked up a little bit. This is an underfunded area federally. It's a small population, both in SCI and TBI. And so these targeted dollars to sort of grease the wheels and move and accelerate some of these projects attracts more dollars. So absolutely.
Thank you.
Sen
And
Nelson.
Mr. Chair, just to follow up, I think that a story needs to be quantified as much as possible. I mean, that is the point. We are innovators, we are medical innovators here in Minnesota, and this money does, yes, it changes lives immediately, but what's most important, it also then brings in those additional funding resources. And I know here at the state legislature, Mr. Chair, we just never quite have enough funds to go around. But one of the things that we like to do is use those funds that bring in other funds. And so I'll be looking for those additional dollars that have come to support deep brain stimulation, spinal cord injury innovations as well, and we should see what we should quantify those, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Senator Housley, did you figure out your technology?
Mr. Chair, no, I didn't. And Brittany's just going to send the video out to everybody after this, and I'll put it on our Senate Facebook page too. But it's just a nice little video to show the actual, the man, the snowmobiler, the 29-year-old, after he got the device inserted, what happened. Yeah, so it's a good video. So I'll have Brittany send it to you.
So Senator Housley, Mr. Roderick wants to say something, then I'll go to you for a close if there's no more questions from members.
Thank you very much. I wanted to add one more piece of data that we are working to quantify, which also came from the governor's change sheet. There's a good portion of the actual work that's being done in these research labs that's being done by students, by medical students, PhD candidates, and postdoctoral candidates. And the idea that this isn't funding education in some form or another is actually not true, patently untrue. But we are actually looking for those numbers. We're asking our research partners and collaborators to say, hey, what percentage of this project has students working in it all the way down to high school level? So there are kids that come from high schools in Minnesota to sort of intern in a lab in neuroscience to figure out how this stuff works. And then undergrad students and then medical students who are deciding, do I want to become a practicing physician or do I want to go into research? And then PhD candidates and postdocs who are at the very beginning of asking the difficult, profound questions about research inquiry. And many of them can't get a position without funding. So this program is currently funding education in this very targeted and effective way. But we're working to quantify that as well.
Thank
Just wanted
you.
to point that out.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. I don't want to take your thunder away, Senator Housley, but just there's this tears in the back of my eyes, mostly about being inspired by the three gentlemen we've heard from today and what they represent. So I'm going to stop now so you can go, but then I'll come back and we'll wrap up this bill. Thank you, Senator Housley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I was going to say the same thing, Senator Abler. You couldn't ask for three brighter, awe-inspiring testifiers before us today, which again solidifies the importance of this program. And this program shouldn't be held in jeopardy because of a revenue increase. This program was in place. It's proven to work. It is getting people literally back on their feet. And so to cut the funding for this is really disappointing. So this bill will add money to it and help others get back on their feet. So I want to thank you, Mr. Chair and members, and my testifiers. I hope to see you again. Well, I'm going to run downstairs. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, and thank you, Senator. And just to the mechanics of this bill, this was an informational hearing on a draft. And so I helped assemble with Senator Housley, and I'm just so grateful for her strong leadership on this and her understanding of this topic, and for all the committee members, and how the Senate really is united. I can't think there's a senator who would not agree with this bill in terms of even expanding the program. So the governor's concern was it doesn't belong at higher ed. Well, I thought, well, how about DHS? How about in Department of Health? And maybe we'll decide it's at the right place. And so that's the process, and then can we actually expand it to help more people, even in times when we have to make hard choices. And I think sometimes the hardest choice to make is the best choice, to actually do the most good you can and find something that doesn't rise to this level that we should do less of. And so just thank you again, gentlemen, for your courage and your leadership. And I don't know that you plan to inspire a whole audience of watchers, but you inspired me and you inspired this committee. And so I believe the next stop, I believe this bill will be sent to higher ed when it finally comes in. So we'll just see what that has to do. So Senator Housley has the bill. It's being jacketed. And I got to get off this topic or I'm going to cry. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
So now we have to talk about federal funds. That's a hard transition. So anyway, Mr. Greenman, we had more time, but I think you might have found the topic quite engaging and really important. So there's anyway, I saw you prepared a packet, which maybe you can give us the highlights of that, and we can try to talk about some of these grant funds. So wherever you are, welcome to the committee.
Mr. Chair, Dave Freeman with the Department of Human Services. How much time do you have for this?
About 45 minutes.
Oh, okay.
So maybe you can just overview. I'm really interested in a little bit of the content on the ones we've selected. So maybe you can just even do a 5-minute on what federal grants are, what the LAC process is, and then we can, if that works for you.
Sure. Why don't I start with the PowerPoint and go through that? I think what I planned to do was talk about the amount of funds we get, sort of the form in which we receive the funds, and then also some of the requirements around getting legislative approval to spend the federal funds. So is the PowerPoint up? I don't know. Oh, I guess it is now. Okay. So currently the state in fiscal year 21 is projected to receive about $12 billion in federal funding, which represents about a 16% increase over 2020. Much of the increase is due to the funding we received as a result of the COVID pandemic. But we are seeing a general increase in federal funds over time. The increase has been about 26% since fiscal year 2018. And the next slide will show that increase. And as you can see, it peaks in 21 and then it declines slightly in 22 and 23 as we are projected to receive fewer COVID dollars. The federal funding comes to the Department of Human Services from a number of sources. One is the federal financial participation we receive on to match state expenditures for various programs. We also receive grants. We receive block grants, which are allocated to states based on a formula set in federal law. And we apply for competitive grants that different federal agencies award that we compete with other entities to receive. We receive pass-through grants that really flow right through us to directly to the recipients. We receive administrative reimbursement that we pass through to counties and tribes, and we also keep some of it ourselves to administer programs. These are the admin costs that we get. And then, of course, there's the federal funding related to COVID-19. What this shows you is sort of a pie chart of the funding and how it breaks down. As you can see, the federal financial participation portion is by far the biggest amount, and that's largely the Medicaid match. The pass-through grants are about 6.9%. Administration's about 6%. Our block grants that we receive from the feds are about 4.8%. The COVID money that we received in fiscal year 21 amounts to about 1.4%. And then the competitive grants amount to a very small amount, as you can see, about less than 0.5%. Moving on, just a little bit about federal financial participation, as most of you are pretty familiar with that. I think it's the medical assistance matching funds, and we would receive about 50% federal match on most of medical assistance. For a portion of it, for the adults without kids, we receive 90%, and then we receive an enhanced match under the Family First Coronavirus Relief Act that's temporary. And then we also receive credits through the Minnesota Care Program, through the Basic Health Plan. We receive a federal subsidy to help us pay for that program. And then North Star Care for Children, we receive Title IV-E funds that help offset that cost. And then our alternative care program also qualifies for a match, MA match. The FFP that we get, the federal financial participation, is dedicated to paying the federal share for those programs. So we don't have any discretion over how those dollars are used. They just go directly into paying for those programs. The next source of funds is the block grants, and those are allocated to states, as I said, based on a formula in federal law. And so we get a certain amount, and that in some cases it changes, in some cases it doesn't. The Temporary Assistance for Needy Families is the largest one, the TANF program. That's a block grant of about $259 million. And I talked, I think, in front of this committee a few weeks ago about that. The other large block grant we receive is a Child Care Development Block Grant, which in a normal year will receive about $190 million. That did go up. We did receive some special funds as a result of COVID to pay for special activities to support the childcare industry during the pandemic. Then some of the other smaller funds are the Social Services Block Grant, the Community Services Block Grant, and then some other funds we receive. States typically have more discretion about how we use block grants, but we have to operate within federal parameters. And so there's usually parameters around how we can spend money, but we do have some flexibility. And then because of the predictability in the block grants that we receive and the amounts, and then just in the annual amounts we get, often the cost of the financing, we use the block grants to budget. We budget the block grants into financing programs in the department because we're able to do that because of the predictability of the funds. Next is competitive grants. These are grants that the department applies for and receives from the federal agencies. We actually, the number of grants that we get through the competitive process is actually larger than the number of block grants we get, but the amounts tend to be a lot smaller, which is why in that pie chart, you saw that it was just a sliver. These are often time-limited projects to test out certain approaches to addressing a problem, and we get them in a whole variety of ways. And I'll talk a little bit about some specific ones that Senator Abler had asked me to touch on later. Pass-through grants are dollars that go through the state and directly to recipients. And the largest example of this is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. In fiscal year 21, we received about $707 million in SNAP funds, which represents a 19% increase over fiscal year 2020. And a lot of that increase has to do with, again, COVID. SNAP provides about 475,000 Minnesotans with an average of about 180, I think it's 108, maybe it's $108 per year in food assistance. Then administrative funds, these are dollars that are used by DHS and counties and tribes to offset the cost of operating programs. So county eligibility workers, the county staff who work with people on public assistance programs, are some of that funding to pay for those staff come from the federal government. In 2021, we received about $743 million in federal administrative funds. And the programs that we receive those dollars help us administer programs related to SNAP, child welfare, medical assistance, and other economic assistance programs for families. Then the federal COVID funds, these are dollars. We received about $600 million from the federal government to address COVID, the COVID pandemic in fiscal years 20 and 21. The largest sources were about $185 million for Child Care Development Block Grant. We got about $53 million for behavioral health. And then, as you can see, $23 million each for nutrition services and isolation. We also received about $271 million from the Coronavirus Relief Fund through the Legislative Advisory Commission. And those were largely for childcare, nutrition, isolation, and shelter, and for grants to day services providers and similar types of providers as well. Then moving on to the requirements that we have, unless there's specific legislative authority granting us the ability to spend federal funds, we need to go through the legislature to get approval to spend federal dollars. The process differs depending on whether the legislature's in session or not. If the legislature is in session during the governor's budget, as part of the governor's budget process, we submit a federal funds table, and which we submitted on, I think, January 26th. And a member of the LAC, the Legislative Advisory Commission, has 20 days to request further review on a particular item in the federal funds table. And in that case, if they were to request a further review, federal funds couldn't be spent on that particular item unless we requested, or the request for review was withdrawn, the authority to spend the federal funds was put in state law, or the legislature adjourned for the year. Then moving on, when the legislature is not in session, there's two processes. There's a 10-day review process through getting approval through the LAC, and that requires if there's an urgency to spend funds and the receipt of the federal funds could not have been anticipated. In that case, the LAC would have 10 days. We would submit our request through the Minnesota Management and Budget, and the commissioner of MMB would then submit the request to the LAC, and then there would be 10 days in which the LAC could request further review if they had wanted to, if there were a negative recommendation about the use of the federal funds, the governor would then submit a request, and then the LAC would have the ability to issue a recommendation in terms of whether to fund the grants or not, or to allow the state to spend, or DHS to spend the money or not. The 20-day review is in cases we have that each October, which basically is a way for us to get federal approval to spend federal funds during the period when the legislature is not in session, and that's sort of a normal process. We are not allowed to permit or not permitted to spend the funds unless there's if there's a recommendation, a negative recommendation, or review or request to review the funds further. And until that negative recommendation goes away, or until whoever the LAC member was who requested the review is satisfied, we can't spend the funds. So that's the process that we have to go through to spend the federal dollars. Senator Ayler, you had asked about some specific grants, and I was going to go through those and just kind of highlight some of the key issues.
Mr. Greenman, while you're there, so I appreciate the whole big picture. In the governor's budget book, there were pages of, multiple pages of grants. And even being here a while, I discovered I wasn't familiar with the mechanics of some of those. I was curious who gets them, what's the overlap with existing programs, and do they actually create a difference? And so, you'll do your best you can in the half hour that I've left you. So anyway, and I don't apologize for taking the time for the previous topic. It was just so compelling. But so I may be asking for more information on some of these. So, but just do the best you can now, Mr. Greenman. And if members have a question on a particular one, I guess feel free to ask. I'm just curious. Sometimes grants have been around a while. They get kind of dusty and maybe not quite as effective. Senator Nelson.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question has to do a little bit about the approval to spend federal funds, and that has to do with the 20 days to request further review. That would be when we are in session. But beyond the 20 days, my understanding is that the legislature can slow down the grants, the dispersal of those grants, but it cannot stop those grants and say, no, we think this is not the best use of these federal grants. And my understanding is that the legislature does not have that authority, either when in session regarding those federal funds as part of the LAC, and also when we are out of session. And so I just wanted a little bit of clarification from Mr. Greenman about the federal funds. Let's start with during session. So when the legislature is in session, there are federal funds coming. We know this year that the America Recovery Act has been passed, signed into law by President Biden. We're looking at $1.9 trillion being dispersed to the states. We know some of that will be coming to Minnesota. One, I'm wondering if there's any estimate of how much that might be. And then secondly, if you could once again explain the role of the Legislative Advisory Committee, the LAC, regarding those federal funds. Certainly the option is there to ask for information for further review. And my experience as education chair is that the department has been very good at giving that review and answering those questions. But I never recall the opportunity to do anything that would indicate that there is a better way to spend this money to get better results for Minnesotans. But where does that exist? Where does that option for the legislature to weigh in with different options, different ways to spend those federal funds? Where does that exist in this process that you're describing today?
So, Senator Nelson, that question could consume the rest of the 25 minutes we have left to go through 20 grants. And so there's a very brief version of that in the notes that Mr. Greenman had. And so if I could ask you to kind of take that offline, you could have a hearing in your own committee about what happens. And so actually my intention is the very thing. So if we can discover that some of these grants could be better spent, maybe we should have a talk about that. And so I'd like just to have Mr. Greenman kind of just at least whistle through these so we can have an idea of actually to the point of your very question, could they be spent better? So, and the answer, I believe, is if the legislature agrees on a different way to spend them during session and the governor signs it, then they would be different. So, Mr. Greenman, do you mind? Is that okay, Senator Nelson?
Yes, we certainly can discuss this later and in brief today.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Greenman, so if you want to just go through, I don't know what you have in mind about detail, but just do the best you can on just being dealt a very short amount of time for a very big project. That's how good we know you are.
Sure, Mr. Chair. So I'll start with the first block of grants deals mainly with child welfare issues. And so the first grant you had asked about was, it's called Promoting Safe and Stable Families. And this is a child welfare grant through Title 4B2 under a federal law. And what this does is it provides grant funds to help prevent the unnecessary separation of children from their families. The funding provides grants to community-based agencies, counties, tribes, to provide services to families to reduce the risk of maltreatment, to prevent child maltreatment and improve family functioning for families reported to the Child Protection Services. And this grant helps serve about 20,000 families. As you can see, we get about in the neighborhood of $4 million a year. This is an allocation grant, so it's something that we get based each year based on a formula in federal law or federal statute. So the funds, the programs funded by this allocation include a family assessment response, a parent support outreach program, and a family group decision making. And those are all sort of collaborative efforts between local agencies, other community groups, and families to try to, in a healthy way, keep families together and make sure that there's a safe, stable place for kids to be.
Okay, so Mr. Greenman, I appreciate that, and part of this is turning into a conference committee where the staff just kind of reads a little thing. And so one thing that just provokes this, and I appreciate the narrative in there, but it's a very brief narrative about that. And so maybe just as we go down, you can just maybe have the title, and then if you could just, the members can read, the public can read that, because that'll just make you tired or make me tired. But if you can just let us know who gets it and how was the effectiveness evaluated. If you could maybe get to that, and if that's beyond today, then we'll look into that some more. But is that fair? So you mentioned on the first one, they go to groups, like, so what, and maybe is it is it competitive? Is there a formula to the counties? And does it work? That's my real interest in these. And if they could be used better, like we're doing family first. We're doing some aging stuff. We're doing some independence and foster care and all that. So are we getting there with this money, or could it be spent better? That's my real interest. And so I don't know if that sets you up to be unfair for today. But you want to give it a shot, Mr. Greenman?
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to try to provide whatever information I can. Certainly the people with the expertise on these programs that can probably answer questions around, is it working? Is it, how does it work within our overall human services system? And, is it making a measurable outcome? Those are probably questions I'm not going to be able to answer today, just because I don't have that level of expertise.
No, I get it. And so This is actually like just eating, a dinosaur or something. You just have to start with one bite. But, and so.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Benson,
it's Senator Benson. I'm remote. If Mr. Greenman could, in addition to the list you gave us, are there state matching dollars? I'm not sure the screen that we're looking at here is just this the federal money, or is this all funds? So to some extent, if he could tell us if there's a required state match, maintenance of effort. I think those two things might be particularly important to this committee, because if we look at shifting away from the federal priority, we would need to backfill with state dollars. So I'm on the same page with you, Mr. Chair. I just have a different question. So
thank you. And so, Senator Benson, there's a sheet that, to my eyes, looks like an Excel spreadsheet. I don't know how to do one of those, but there's a 2-page summary. I don't know how you'd get it where you are, but if you go to the Senate page,
yep, I'll find it.
It's there, and that actually has the MOE on it. So, just if there's 20 minutes, how are we going to even make this worthwhile?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Senator. Yeah, that's a compliment, Mr. Greenman. Go ahead, sir.
What I can do is maybe talk through briefly what the grants are, who they go to, whether there's an MOE or a maintenance of effort or a state match involved, and then to what extent we have flexibility in terms of how we spend the money.
That'd be good.
In some cases, we don't have a lot of flexibility, and that might help you figure out which ones you want to dig into a little bit more.
And so there's close to 20, you've got about a little more than 20 minutes. So I guess we'll just do the Dave Greenman 1 minute per thing and see how that goes. And that'll be this is a good start. So first you admire the dinosaur, like, oh, that's a big dinosaur. So we're going to get that far today. So thank you, Mr. Greenman.
So the next one is called the Chafee Foster Care Independence Program. In Minnesota, that's known as the Support for Emancipation and Living Functionality, or the SELF program. And this is really to reduce the risk of of youth in foster care, aging out of foster care, and then becoming homeless as a result. And so this is helping to give them the foundation and the ability to be independent once they age out of foster care. These funds go to the counties and tribes for independent living skills programming and purchases for eligible current and former foster care youth. There is a required required state match, an MOE required involved in that. I'm not sure exactly what the details are of that, but that is a requirement. And the funds generally go to support kids who are between the ages of 14 and 23. And we do currently budget those dollars to go to the counties and to go to the tribes. So that's sort of built into the base based on what we get each year from the federal government, which is about in the neighborhood of $3 million.
Okay, so
So the next one is the community-based child abuse prevention grants. These are grants that go to counties based on the child's population of children. And there is no required match or MOE associated with this. This is an allocation that we get again. It's a formula in federal law. We get around $2 million a year. We have some flexibility in terms of how the money is spent, although we are somewhat limited. Right now, we use the dollars mainly to prevent child abuse and neglect, to foster understanding and appreciation and knowledge of diverse populations, to help treat and prevent child abuse and neglect. Let's see. The next one is the adoption of incentive payments. These are payments that go out to states to encourage us to increase the number of foster child adoptions and special needs adoptions and older child adoptions, which are basically the hardest ones harder kids to place. There's a state statute related to this funding. So we receive it as an incentive payment, but it is in state law. What it does is it provides support services and training for foster care and adoptive and kinship families and the professionals that serve them. And so we currently budget these dollars as well under our state statute. Let's see. We've received funding from the Family First Transition Act.
You can probably skip that. That's too long of a chat. So
Okay. Okay. And then the next group of grants are related to the aging population, and it's related mainly to senior nutrition, prevention of abuse of older adults, and caregiver support. And I probably don't need to go through each one of these, but they generally require a state match, have an MOE requirement. We get them on a formula basis. We've gotten them for probably, in many of them, some of them have to do with COVID, but for those that in the general grants that we get, we've gotten them for about 40 years. There is a state law regarding the State Board on Aging that governs how these grants are used. They're allocated to area agencies on aging to be distributed, like I said, mainly for congregate dining and for home delivered meals. We don't have a lot of flexibility in terms of how we use these monies. This is, we use them for those two purposes mainly. There are some special, I mentioned elder abuse. There's an elder abuse grant. It's a very small one. It's an allocation that we get. Again, and we've gotten them for about 40 years, but it's only about $71,000 a year. The caregiver support grant goes towards providing information and respite education and training for family caregivers, and also to support grandparents who are raising their grandchildren. And that's about $2.9 million a year. Again, that's an allocation grant. We've gotten that for about 20 plus years. And again, the funds go to the area agencies on aging to distribute. Let's see. So I think I can probably skip over the rest of the in grants.
So, Mr. Green, just to help your staff understand what I'm getting at, like in 2021, under the special programs for the aging, number, whatever, the third from the bottom, well, I've got the sheet, 90, whatever, it's $52,000. I mean, what does, I mean, I don't want you to answer, but like, really? I mean, that's just, in a budget like ours, who knows what happens to that? It just kind of falls somewhere, and even, so that's my question. And so, you know, could we do better? And I'm happy that there's a state statute on some of this stuff. So keep going. So wherever you want to land next is fine.
So one of the competitive grants that we've gotten was to enhance state adult protective services. And so the intended goal there, it's about 550,000, or it's the total grant is around a little more than $1 million. But it was a competitive grant. It's for 3 years, and it's basically intended to improve data quality, increase case level reporting, and consistent reporting of adult protective assessments and screening response for vulnerable adults. And basically what we're using it for is to the Vulnerable Adults Data Reporting Center, and which we have in state law. We call it the MARC. We've had that in place. It was something that was strengthened during I think 2019, during the Vulnerable Adults Act modifications. But this is money that we use to help strengthen that reporting system further. Moving down to sort of
Mr. Green, Senator Benson has a question, if that's okay. Senator Benson.
And Mr. Chair, it's more of a comment as members of the committee and the public look at these, even the small grant that you raised, each has a constituency with them. And it is difficult if a grant isn't meeting an objective to cut it or reform it, because there is a person or persons attached to every one of these dollars. I'm looking here, pregnant and postpartum women. I have been reviewing MDH grants, and we have lists and lists and lists of support for pregnant and postpartum women. But if you touch this, Mr. Chair, or the state match that went with it, there would be certainly an elevation of the concern that people who receive these grants. So I just want folks to be aware. Senator Abler is trying to get at, are these grants still working? When's the last time they were reviewed? And you know his heart, that he doesn't want to hurt anyone. But sometimes you have to have a really transparent conversation. And I feel like that's where some of this is going.
Senator Benson, I appreciate the preloading of my intent. That was actually a good thing. So thank you. Mr. Greenman, and that's actually a good point. And so in a time when we're likely to be a little tight on money, how can we make this go further? And Senator Benson, to further to talk about your comments, in 2011, we were way deeper in challenge. And some of the looked like the least effective kind of money we had was federal grants. And so we're trying to do essential, important, and nice, and like, it'd be nice if we do that. Let's just stop doing that. There was something about Lake Superior beach quality or something, and I thought, well, whoever goes to the beach on Lake Superior anyway, but so let's take that money and put it towards somebody with a disability need. Oh, it's a federal grant, and it's free, and so we couldn't touch it, just as an example. And so please, Duluth, don't write me about water quality in Lake Superior for all the beachgoers up there. Anyway, so... But the money all comes from the same place, all of the people watching this. And the needs are just profound, as we saw in the first half of this hearing. So thanks, Senator Benson. And Mr. Greenman, I think you're doing great. Keep going.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the next grant I was going to talk about is a TBI demo grant, or traumatic brain injury demonstration grant. This was a competitive grant that we received, and with the objective of expanding the trauma registry system to collect and analyze data for Minnesotans with TBI, establishing a statewide cross-agency plan for TBI, increasing education and supports for Native Americans living with TBIs, and then streamlining access to person-centered supports, resulting in informed choice. The total amount, we got we're in our third year of this grant. It's about a little less than $500,000. Some of the grant funding goes towards the Traumatic Brain Injury Advisory Committee, and some goes towards, a small amount goes towards funding the Disability Hub, which we use to provide information to folks with disabilities about accessing services and things like that. The goal of the project is to improve our TBI system to better support person-centered approaches and maximize the independence of well-being and health of people with TBIs and their families. So this is a 3-year, this is one of those competitive grants that we get a lot of, but that we don't have, we're required, we actually apply basically with that specific work plan in place. So we essentially tell them ahead of time, this is what we're planning to do to address the TBI issue in Minnesota, or this is what we want to use this money for. And we get approval. And then what we would do is go to the LAC if we're not in session and say, submit a form to MMB. MMB submits it to the LAC, and then there's 20 days to make a decision about whether to go forward and spend the money or not.
So, Mr. Greenman, this is actually a good example of a grant. I mean, the objectives are incredible, and who would not want to support that? But now we're giving you $164,000 a year to build in actually some permanent infrastructure with the hub, and I believe I'm familiar with the council. I think I was there. I don't remember if that's the new one. I was at some council like that, and I think we need councils, and I think people need to be weighing in, much as in the spinal cord issue with where you had the public way that they actually designed the thing and actually worked better than we could have here, perhaps. So I guess just a case in point, you have lofty objectives that are totally really good objectives and almost no money to do it, and then the money stops. And so that's what I'm just wondering about. And then a small money like this, who even really cares? But we should care. I mean, $164,000 is more than most people I know make, maybe twice as much even. And so that's a lot of money that they would spend pretty carefully. And so what came of it? And so is it something that we could have done without it? And I mean, I'm not suggesting this go away. It's only got one more year, but you understand my question. And that's just kind of a building off what Senator Benson is going after.
Yep, Mr. Chair, I can't speak for all of these grants because I'm not intimately knowledgeable about all of them, but I would guess in most, if not all cases, there's some sort of evaluation built in and some sort of performance measures we have to sort of look at whether we're meeting or not with these grants. Whether that's sort of number of people served or outcomes, I'm not sure, but that's the kind of information we look to get back to you with on some of these grants.
Right, and we just picked out some of the ones that seemed kind of interesting and that I couldn't describe everything about. Like the Chafee program, we're talking about foster care and continuing to be older, and there's some new money coming in the second, whatever that that thing. And then there's money coming in the third bill, which isn't even written yet. And so I guess my real question is, how can we take this money, integrate it with where we're trying to go in Minnesota to help persons with disabilities be more independent, and both in housing and employment, how to create more self-sufficiency in the families that are on economic supports, that are trapped under a steel ceiling where if they make too much, they're going to lose it, and where they're totally interested in in being more self-sufficient, and curious, just to provoke the thought, which people know I do sometimes, but I was talking to, I'll just say, a group, well-known, everybody likes this group, and they talked about wealth building. And I don't know the last time a person on TANF thought about wealth building. And wouldn't that be interesting if that became not just self-sufficiency, but to actually build wealth so you could actually help your peers, and you know, and so that's what I'm getting at in my philosophical head there, Mr. Greenman. So is there anything more you wanted to cover on those grants?
Mr. Chair, no, I think I would just say that I think this, the ability of the legislature to weigh in, I think in a lot of these cases is through your ability to obviously make laws and to, and I know in some cases it's not frequent, but it's happened where the legislature has directed us to apply for funds for a particular purpose. And it certainly requires knowledge that the funds are available in the first place, but there have certainly been instances where you've directed us to request funds or directed how we would use the funds in state law. Those are some examples I can think of how you might, be involved more in those decisions around federal funds.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and I think we're kind of coming in for a landing here, actually on time. So I think we're probably going to request some information about a bunch of the grants, just to try to sort out, can we make them do more good? Like, who gets it? What's the overlap with existing programs? How's it distributed? Is it formulated at the county? Is it competitive? And I can't imagine how many people want to compete for a grant that's $164,000, and if it's like 10 groups get it or 2, is it effective? And then the flexibility that we do have under the federal guidance. So, Senator Hoffman, do you want to have any last thoughts?
Mr. Chair, thank you, but in the interest of time, I think this has been absolutely a good discussion. I wish we had more time to go through the sheets, and especially I know one of the things that came out was, and it was grateful, Brittany, for putting that, you added that piece on there on state match versus maintenance of effort. So the question is, if we do this, do we have to keep a maintenance of effort? So I think this has been very helpful, at least for me and others that have talked about, where this is going and what we need to do with the budget. But I thank you for doing this.
Thanks. And any other questions from members? I just discovered in the Zoom thing, when there's a screen sharing, I can hardly see anybody. So please, going forward, I know I missed a Senator Franzen question last time, and I was sad about that. And so, we're all peers here. Just if I seem to have missed you, do not be shy to interrupt. I may regret saying that, but I'm saying that now. And Mr. Greenman, I want to thank you for welcoming us into your home today. And for, I don't know how you keep track of all these numbers. I really don't. So anyway, to the department, there'll be some questions we'll be asking, and hopefully they'll be reasonable, and we can help sort this out. And to the public, who's been observing some of these programs, you're like, why do they do this? These people are so dusty in their approach. We should find a better way. This is the opportunity to maybe find a better way and to try to weave in some of these. And so in terms of self-sufficiency and even wealth building and independence for individuals, to get the most money out of the value out of the feds, what the feds give us, and what we do as a state. So I'd like to point out it is exactly on time. So thank you very much. Actually, I've got look at this. There's even a gavel. We're adjourned. Thank you. From the first hybrid hearing of the